Today's topic is municipal vulnerability preparedness work. And we're welcoming Claire Rundelli, Town Conservation Agent and Planner with us. Thanks, Claire, for coming to us on our last Coffee with a Purpose session of the year. I think you probably know everybody here, but let's go around and have folks do their usual introduction, and maybe part of what they can say is, have you ever heard of a municipal vulnerability prepared? I'm not even gonna try to say it again. Yeah. Or did you think that MVP was most valuable player, as I did? I always thought it was most valuable player, but let's start with the folks at MetroWorks.
Okay, well, I'll start today. I'm Martin Kessel, and I'm co-hosting Coffee with a Purpose, and Claire obviously knows me as chair of the Open Space Advisory Committee, which is one of her many roles. And I've heard of MVP, but not this round. It was a round a few years ago, so I'm very curious as to what this new round is all about. We'll go to Bill.
Hi, Bill. You know me. Trail Steward, and now chair of the Community Preservation Committee. I have not heard of VP. I can't even say it. I'm interested in hearing what's going on. So welcome.
I guess I'll introduce myself as well. I'm Claire Rundelli. I'm the Conservation Agent and Environmental Planner for the town of Natick, and I do think that I know most everybody on the call or in the room today.
Good morning. I'm Cindy Bates, 5-year resident of Natick, Trail Steward, and Natick, keep Natick beautiful, picker upper. Hi, I'm Kathleen Donovan. I think we met here the other time I met you. I'm 34 years resident of Natick, on the library board of trustees, and volunteer with Keep Natick Beautiful.
And that's it for MetroWorks.
Great. Tom?
Yeah, I'm Tom Daly. I'm a 34-year resident of Natick, active in climate activism, and a member of Spark, and I have never heard of MVP.
Thanks, Tom. Brian?
Good morning. I'm in a butter to Lake Scituate. Work with Pat on keep Natick beautiful, and hope MVP really turns into something impactful. Hope to see some good improvements. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Carrie?
Hi, good morning, Claire. Let's see, 21-year resident here, treasurer for Keep Natick Beautiful. I'm the Repair Cafe organizer, and something you might know, about 6 years ago, with help of Bill and Brian, we started Renewable Natick, which drafted the resolution that town meeting passed in October 2018 that sort of gave Jillian a bit of a roadmap to implement the net zero plan for the town.
Thanks, Karen. Judy?
Hey everyone, Judy Dixon, housing equity advocate at Family Promise Metro West, longtime resident and involved in education, recreation, Spark Kindness, Path for Adaptive Opportunities, First Congregational Church, and I am unfamiliar with MVP.
Thanks, Judy. Rick?
Hi, Claire. Good to see you. I'm looking forward to your talk. I'll leave it at that. I'm not sure I know if this has anything to do with stormwater, but if it does, I'm even more interested. So
Great. Thanks, Rick. Catherine?
Hi, I am Catherine Doran. This is my 30th year living in Natick, and I have missed the last few of these sessions because things come up on Monday. I'm glad I'm free today. I have no idea what this topic is about, and I'm looking forward to hearing it.
That gives you the chance to make up stuff, Claire, but Brinley. Brinley? Yeah, there you go.
Good morning. Brinley Vickers, 24-ish year resident of Natick. Glad you're here today. I am familiar with it, and I'm glad you're here to talk about it because I think it's important to get it out. Thanks.
Thanks, Brinley. Sally? Might be away. How about Pat?
Oh, good morning.
Yeah. We're just introducing ourselves. Have you ever heard of MVP? Pat?
You're on mute.
Oh, yeah, yeah, you're on mute now too. Yeah.
Most valuable player.
There you go.
All right,
Okay.
there you go.
And thanks for joining us,
Yeah.
Claire. I'm sorry I'm a little late, but always good to be here. Pack on away. Keep Natick beautiful.
Great, thanks. And one more try for Sally. Hopefully she's just getting herself a cup of coffee. Good, I think
Probably.
that's it. So again, welcome, Claire. Great to have you here and educate us.
Wonderful. And Rick, you're going to be excited. We are talking about stormwater.
Oh, boy. My favorite topic. Thank you.
And so just to give a little bit of background before I get into the details too much of the program, the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, which I will refer to as MVP throughout to save myself about a dozen words throughout the presentation, is a statewide program that's been in place since about 2018. Natick was actually one of the first communities to become an MVP community in 2018. Through a process that was spearheaded by Jillian Wilson Martin, the development of the Community Resilience Building Plan, which some of the folks in this room and on Zoom may have participated in. Once we completed that plan, the town became eligible for the MVP Action Grant funding, which is funding that's made available for projects and programs and planning efforts that are moving forward climate resiliency in our communities. The statewide program has funded a number of projects here in Natick, and a number of regional projects that Natick has been the lead representative community on. So one that might pop up in folks' memories is the Charles River Flood Model Project, which was about a 5-year project that Natick was the lead community on a regional MVP project with about 20 other communities in the Charles River watershed. There have been several other projects that have been funded through the MVP program. Not going to list all of them right now. If you'd like to read the town reports, Jillian always usually includes a great list. But the town has been really, really wonderfully lucky to be funded by this program a number of times. Because we were one of the first communities and so much has changed in sort of the realm of climate resiliency in the last, 6 years. The state has actually released an MVP 2.0 program that puts a higher focus on community equity in the climate resilience planning process. And Tom, I know you said you don't know about MVP, but you were actually one of our community liaisons in the MVP Climate Equity Project that we did a couple of years ago.
Okay.
So it's definitely sort of all the way through the community. Folks don't necessarily just always associate the grant program name with the project. So Jillian and I have submitted an application for MVP 2.0, which will update our resilience building plan and actually provide us with $50,000 of seed project funding if we're selected for this round. So that's a little bit about what may be coming and what has happened in the past. And now onto the project that I'm here to talk about with you all today, which is a current MVP funding project that the town was selected for as part of the FY25, so fiscal year 25 funding cycle, which runs from July 1st of 2024 through June 30th of 2025. The project that we were selected for is a stormwater treatment feature at Doug Pond. This project was selected because, as I mentioned, the Charles River Flood Model Project actually identified this location, Doug Pond specifically, as a high priority location for flood mitigation. So an area where we have the space, the land ownership, the infrastructure availability to improve the way that flooding is managed and stormwater is managed in this area. And I believe you guys will all get a copy of these slides in Doug's follow-up email. And this is a live link. If you do want to go check out the Charles River Flood Model, I'd highly encourage it. But you can see the images that I have on the screen here today is the current predicted flood depths for the 2-year storm.
Could you just orient us to the
Oh,
the whole
absolutely,
map first?
absolutely.
I'm a little lost.
Yes, Cindy, so the building that you guys see right on the screen here is the Natick High School.
Yeah.
So the image with the colored blocks surrounding the high school is the area of Doug Pond. So this is Pond Road that we see at the top of the screen here,
Okay.
with West Street and Campus Drive sort of trailing along the right edge of each photo. Each photo is of the exact same aerial scope.
And
Now,
what's that?
Settlement Pond is that little thing on the upper right corner, is that correct?
Exactly, yes. So the settling pond is this little pond here, and the blue line that Cindy noted on the corner is actually the limit of the Charles River watershed.
Oh,
So you can note that this location is right on the edge of the watershed. Natick is split in between two watersheds, the Charles River watershed, and there'll be a map a little bit later on, and the Suasco watershed, which is the Sudbury, Assabet, and Concord River watershed. So currently in this area, for the 2-year storm event, which is on average about 2.5 inches of rain in a 24-hour period, and the 100-year storm event, which currently as it is today, is approximately 8.5 inches in a 24-hour period. And the flooding depth in the 2-year storm predicted for the Dug Pond area is only about 6 inches, which is very much in the normal range of water level fluctuations that we would see. The flooding depth for the 100-year storm is closer to about just under 2 feet, 1.89 feet of floodwaters. So again, definitely still within the capacity of the lake and the surrounding area to manage.
Okay.
However, NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Association Institute, I'm always messing up the last letter for that one. Administration, thank you, Martin. Has provided us with predictive data, taking into account climate change models to demonstrate what are the sort of rainfall levels that we may be seeing in the year 2070 under climate change conditions. And you'll see when we change that image, these are now the 2070 projected flooding depths. So we can see the 2-year storm event now looks almost identical to our 100-year flood event from today's day in 2070. And our 100-year storm event is now up to about 3 feet of flooding depth for Dug Pond. And now that might not seem like a huge amount in theory, but when we look at, this is the Memorial Beach Bathhouse, is the building on the screen that we're seeing currently. You can see that when we go from about 2 feet of flood depth to 3 feet of flood depth, that structure is now underwater. And so, obviously this is, a very small scale snippet of what larger flood impacts look like. But the changes also have larger implications to the town's stormwater management system. And higher water levels in the pond can impact groundwater levels, which may impact basement flooding in surrounding homes and structures. So when we look at the pond and we look at, 2 feet of depth, 3 feet of depth, it seems like it's not that big of a deal. It can have a lot of really strong implications, especially in an area that is so heavily used and loved by the public. So there are 4 main project components that are a part of the grant funding that we've received. The main component is the design of a stormwater treatment feature at the settling pond / facilities yard. And this is going to be a feature that incorporates green infrastructure. We're really focusing in at this location on nature-based solutions, which is a term that you'll see come up again later in the slides as well. And I've got this great little scale on the bottom here that sort of shows you, what is the range of green infrastructure to gray infrastructure? Because the reality is when we're looking at these types of stormwater treatment features, we're looking at this whole range to really figure out what is the best option for the specific location, for the problems that we are trying to solve, and also for that ability to be resilient and be adaptive to future climate conditions. So we really are aiming for a feature at the settling pond that is not only going to provide a water quality benefit and allow us an opportunity to plant additional native vegetation, but that will also come with this flood mitigation component. The second,
I have a question.
Of course, Cindy.
Can you explain what a settling pond is?
Yes, of course. So, and I'm gonna, sorry to give folks a little bit of whiplash. I'm just gonna swing right back to that first image of this presentation to give folks that visual of the settling pond and Dug Pond.
Yeah.
So settling pond is generally an area where that has been designed, I'll add that keyword, it has been designed to accept water in advance of a larger water body or larger infiltration system that provides an opportunity for the water to slow, settle out any solids that are being carried by that water, as well as an opportunity for the water to drop off a small amount of nutrients and other components that may have been carried, things like trash, that may have been carried by the runoff to that location. I added that word designed in very critically because this is not a designed settling pond. This pond was essentially wrong place, wrong time. Campus Drive was created and it essentially turned from a wetland into a settling pond. And that's part of the reason that we have such great opportunity at this location for improvement. Of course, yes, I built in time for questions throughout the presentation, so feel free to raise your hand, throw a chat in the comment on in Zoom, and we'll try to get to your questions. The second component, which I think I'm almost a little bit more excited about than the first component, is a review of the entire watershed that drains to that singular settling pond. And now most folks will see that and not necessarily think that that's a huge area, but it's about 160 acres draining to that settling pond. So this is a map of the town's drainage system. The yellow shaded areas are the environmental justice communities that fall within that watershed as determined by the state. And you can see that we go all the way from the wetland behind the community senior center, all the way down through the presidential neighborhoods, through Natick Center, down along South Main Street, the Cedar Gardens residential housing, all of that, even sections of Pond Street, all of that drains to this tiny little settling pond before entering Dug Pond. So you can see again why we have really seen this location as such a high opportunity location. And part of this project will be developing 3 concepts for additional locations throughout the watershed for additional stormwater features. So we won't get any designs from this phase, but we'll have these concepts with real scientific data behind them, because each of the concepts will be selected through a modeling of this watershed to determine where we really can get our best bang for buck. And so we'll have those 3 concepts to then move forward through future funding applications or through future drainage capital improvement projects to implement here in town. And just a little bit about watersheds and how these watershed limits are determined. There's a combination of factors in determining watersheds in our modern society. The first is natural topographic limits and the wetlands that are associated with them. So as folks I'm sure are very aware, there's a pretty hefty ridge line that sort of runs along the backside of Union Street behind the hospital that creates a sort of a natural watershed. But my line might be a little off here. I actually think it cuts right between these 2 wetlands. And then the other is the artificial watershed that we've created through our drainage system. So areas that may have previously drained to more natural water bodies that have been either buried and destroyed or piped through our drainage system. And so the northeastern limit is the drainage system in Marion Street as it comes down to 135. And the southwestern limit is South Main Street, almost right at the intersection of South Main Street and Rockland Street is where that watershed ends.
And so all those little arrows, those are all.
Those are the direction of flow in the pipe system, correct? Yep. And this is not a perfect capture of our drainage system. As I zoom out in the map, some of the little connections get lost.
Yeah.
But pretty much everything bounded within this blue line is draining to this area.
That's fascinating.
And the final 2 components of our project is an evaluation of our the existing settling pond, which actually a member of the Open Space Advisory Committee almost initiated this portion of the concept project by mentioning that he remembered back in the 80s the pond being dredged at one point. Dredging of water bodies does increase flood storage capacity and does revert the process of ponds sedimenting in and becoming wetlands. In today's day and age, dredging is a very expensive endeavor, not only because of the permitting that's required to do it, but also the disposal costs. Soil is not allowed to be disposed of in landfills in Massachusetts, which means the town would either have to be finding a way to reuse that material if it's clean enough for reuse, or disposing of it in the appropriate manner out of state, which, as folks can imagine, can be a very expensive process, especially depending on the volume of soil that may be coming out of this body. So during this project, there'll be a review of the existing pond, including soil samples taken, getting an idea of the pond bathymetry, which is how the bottom of the pond looks currently, to get an idea of the volume of sediment. And will essentially provide us with a feasibility report on the ability to dredge the pond potentially. And the final project component, of which you are all participating in today, is outreach and engagement. Folks may have seen this image on the screen here is the stormwater murals that went in at the 135-27 intersection this summer. And so we're going to be doing a bunch of community engagement throughout this project, and we'll get into that in a little more detail on a later slide. But keep an ear/eye out for the Earth Day all around Natick activities that Eco Natick does every year. During that weekend, we're going to be leading a walk that takes folks from these storm drains that flow to Doug Pond. And we're gonna walk all the way down to Doug Pond. It's about a 1.5 mile walk. And Charles River Watershed Association will be partnering with us on that.
And you're gonna walk on the surface, not in the pipes, right?
Unfortunately, Doug, our pipes are not nearly as big as the old pipes in Boston, and we would be very hard pressed to walk through them.
Well, I don't think I'd want to.
And the final component, which is on the internal side, is that we're going to be providing training and having tour opportunities with our internal DPW staff for them to learn about the installation and maintenance of green infrastructure installations. As folks might know, a big issue with getting these sorts of things incorporated into our capital improvement projects is purely to a certain degree workforce development. People install pipes and catch basins because that's what we know how to install. And so by providing folks with more information and more education about the maintenance, the folks who would actually be doing this maintenance, we're hoping to be able to build capacity within our internal public works department to be able to improve upon our existing green infrastructure installations. The high school has a number of bioswales out in front of it, things like that, but also be able to better maintain any future installations. A quick timeline of the project. I've bolded in green the opportunities for public engagement. But just to give folks an idea of what we have been doing so far, as it may surprise no one, it took us from July 1st through October about 15th to actually get our contracts signed. And so this is not only contracting between the town and the state for the award of the grant funding, it's also our contracting with our consultant, Weston and Sampson, on this project. In November of 24, the project team did a site walk at the area to determine test pit locations. And those test pits were completed in conjunction with the town's public works division. The site was also surveyed and the wetlands were delineated. So if folks are down in that area and you see pink or orange or blue flags hanging from the trees, those are our wetland flags. And we do ask you to please just leave them alone if you wouldn't mind. And in December of 2024, we are really kicking off our community engagement. So Coffee with Purpose, I didn't highlight because we are all actively here at this time. But I want to also highlight that our survey is being released today. We'll get into that a little bit more on some later slides, but just to keep us moving, as we move into 2025, the watershed model for that watershed that I showed everyone is going to be developed using the existing Charles River flood model as a base and just adding in more detail to that sort of small snapshot. Site use review, so meeting with our public works and facilities staff to see how they use that area currently, what space can we take over and what spaces really need to be maintained for that facilities use. And the survey is going to close on Friday, January 17th. So it'll be open for just about a full month. In February, we're likely going to be having our very first public meeting. This may happen right at the end of January. We're still setting final dates for that, so keep an eye out. but likely February, we'll be having a virtual public meeting to look at some of those draft designs for the feature at the settling pond. As we move into March, I'm gonna be doing a presentation to the Earth Club at Natick High School. I have this one underlined because it is public engagement, but not necessarily public engagement. I'm gonna be presenting to the Earth Club at Natick High School, as well as any other students who would like to attend. And we're gonna be doing some engagement with the science staff at the high school to see about the potential for developing some curriculum to be used at the feature that's being designed. Along with the tiny forest and the existing green infrastructure at the high school site, we really see an opportunity to develop some additional outdoor classroom features that can be incorporated into the existing standards around stormwater, around just water in general, around pollution, things like that. We were hoping to get pond bathymetry done this fall. Unfortunately, the drought conditions left us in a place where we wouldn't be getting accurate information if we did them this fall, in terms of average water level depth and things like that. So that work has been delayed till the spring, but that'll be done in April. And that's also when the internal NBS's nature-based solutions maintenance training will happen with Public Works.
Can you just expand on bathymetry for a bit?
Yes, so bathymetry is the study of the pond, so where the pond bottom is, what the soil materials in the pond is, where the banks are located. Essentially giving us a very detailed snapshot of that existing settling pond, as well as the initial inlet of Dug Pond, where the infrastructure transitions from one to the other.
So is it a map?
It will get a map essentially, but it'll be more of a cross section because they'll drop weights down to get measurements. So we will have a survey plan for the whole area, and then we'll have essentially cross sections of the pond.
So, aside, I was really excited to hear you're thinking about including the high school, or planning to include the high school. I know several years ago, some of the kids in the robotics club did bathymetry on Dug Pond. It might be interesting to mention this to them as well.
Sarah.
I'm assuming you have a consultant that's going to do the bathymetry, but I know the robotics kids at least several years ago.
To observe and learn, absolutely.
Yeah, I have a question. Yeah, the draft design for the settling pond, is that something that Weston and Sampson will?
They are doing
They're
the
doing
design,
it,
yes,
okay.
so it will be a fully engineered design. Essentially, at the end of this project, we will be ready to go before the Conservation Commission for permitting, for implementation. I'll talk about it a little bit more, but we have some potential funding for construction already in the works. So it is looking like the Eco-Natick Earth Day weekend is going to be that first weekend in May this year because of the timing of April school break. So we currently have the CRWA walk, as well as likely later in the month of May, there will be an in-person public meeting to review the concepts. Essentially, this will be more of an educational meeting, but to review the concepts that have been developed for the larger watershed. For an opportunity for folks to provide input on the features that they feel may or may not work. Maybe the locations that we selected weren't the perfect locations. And it'll just be an opportunity to provide some additional education about why we're pursuing these types of solutions. In June, we'll be finalizing our watershed concepts and the dredging feasibility study. It's not marked on the calendar, but the stormwater feature design will be finalized essentially right up until the end of the project here. And then June 30th, 2025, our project will be completed.
So the idea of the dredging is it increases the capacity,
Exactly.
and that's what you're ideally would like to do if it's feasible?
Ideally, we'd like to do that. We also, obviously, depending on what the water quality information, the soil sampling comes back as, it may be an opportunity to remove contaminants that are being flushed into Dug Pond during large storm events. That area has been accepting, the runoff from this whole area for quite some time, so it's definitely picked up some less than ideal things that are probably sitting and lurking in that sediment.
Is there gonna be any thought to how to best recycle the dredged material?
Oh yeah, that'll be a part of the feasibility study. They'll do a cost evaluation of what it would cost to dispose of based on the quality of the soil, if there's an ability for us to reuse it, that is always gonna be the preference of the town.
Oh, yep. So the project is to make a plan.
Yes, so this is a, how it's referred to in the categories of MVP is this is a planning and design project.
Okay.
So the Charles River flood model was purely a planning project. There was no design that occurred. We do have design occurring in this phase. We had the opportunity and did consider applying for a 2-year MVP grant to try to cover permitting and initial construction costs. But because of the procurement around design versus construction projects that the town has to adhere to, it's usually a lot easier from not only a project management standpoint, but a funding distribution standpoint for us to just fully separate those phases of the project. And as I said, the town has already worked with the Charles River Watershed Association on an application that's been submitted to EPA for funding to construct, to pay for dredging if that's determined to be feasible. We've essentially requested almost $5 million in funding from the EPA to construct this as well as contribute to other portions of the project. And that's a much larger regional project. I believe there's 4 or 5 other communities that have similarly scaled projects that were identified by the flood model that are looking to pursue additional funding. Pat, go ahead.
Pat and Sally have their hands up. Yeah, Pat.
My question, Claire, is that it sounds really exciting, but in Natick, we have the other settling ponds, but they're all connected to the Sudbury River and the Lake Achitchewit watershed, like the one over by Roach Brothers, that particular settling pond. I don't think it's ever been maintained or for a long, long time. But that's a multi-town thing, right? It'd be much more complicated for us.
Yeah, Pat, there would be a multi-town effort as well as involving DCR. DCR is the owner of that settling pond there, which is part of the reason that at this time we've been focused on town-owned parcels where we have the ability to operate with more flexibility.
Right, I understand.
Yeah, but we still have our eyes on it, Pat. Don't worry.
And Sally?
Yes, I was wondering, Claire, down on June 2025, concepts and dredging feasibility. What in the sort of atmosphere, who would be doing the dredging? What agency? Who is that? DPW?
So Sally, if it's determined that dredging is feasible, the town would likely be working with an outside contractor to do that work. There are a number of companies throughout the state that specialize in dredging work. And the town would likely be looking to the experts to help us with that work.
Thank you.
So a little bit more detail about our community engagement. Oh, Rick, go ahead. Yep.
Yeah, I'm going to use a word that I heard yesterday called intersectionality, which you probably know. And because we have sitting here Judy Dixon from Family Promise, and I know their walk in the spring, which I've done many times, generally goes from it used to anyway, go from the community center all the way to the high school and then back, walking past. I think they don't walk past the settlement pond anymore, but used to. So I'm just wondering if there is, their walk is early April, right, Judy?
It's actually been moved to May.
May. Oh, wow. Well, you get an enormous crowd. You need, your focus 100% on fundraising because it's a huge fundraising event. But at the same time, it might be an information opportunity larger, as a booth there or something larger than, to build awareness larger than you might get at Eco Natick Earth Day all around town. I say that obviously as part of Eco Natick that is very pleased to hear that you're doing a walk for Earth Day all around Natick. So that's wonderful. I'm all for more walks, but maybe that's something you two want to chat about.
Yeah, absolutely. We're definitely looking for any opportunity to engage with the public on this matter. So Judy, you might be getting an email from me later this week.
Okay, great. And I'll talk to our events coordinator on that too and see how we might be able to find some mutual way to support each other.
It's a really fascinating idea, not just for this, but the walk could have stations along the way. People might need breaks. And it's like, well, check out this information booth for organization A or B or C. But
that is sort of exactly what I was thinking, Doug. Catch people when they're taking a breather.
yeah.
Empty your water bottle here and see where it ends up.
Yeah, we thought about this a couple of years ago for Earth Day all around Natick, because it was running around the same time, but I think the idea came up too late for both organizations to figure out how to do it, so we didn't end up doing it, but it is a great idea.
At some point, floods could create more homeless people, to point out the obvious, but we're not there yet. Anyway.
Yeah.
It's a quote I liked from Thoreau that I wanted to put on a sign along the way. What is the use of a home if you don't have a tolerable planet to put it on? So.
Pat, you had your hand up again?
Yeah, I just have one other thing I wanted to mention. You know, there was a really a large scale dredging and cleanup project at the labs, you know, because of all the pollutants that the soldier system over the years. And that project, what I was aware of anyway, was millions of dollars, and it scraped off a layer of the sediment in Pegan Cove, which had all kinds of PCBs and stuff in it. And is that kind of thing something that, I mean, hopefully you won't be doing anything in that category, but that was federal dollars, right? That
Yes, I believe that was federal dollars. We would not be looking at something on the same scale. While we do expect some level of contaminants in the soil, we're not looking at what would potentially be classified as hazardous waste.
Yeah.
Being dredged from this pond. More things like higher lead and mercury levels than what we would like to see in clean soil material.
Right.
The labs is indeed a federal program. Superfund sites tend to involve lots of money, and it's, you know, specialized disposal and all kinds of stuff. Whereas this site, if there were contaminants detected above certain levels, it would enter the state system, which is, it's a different regulatory program.
Okay.
So you're getting Sarah off on the things she knows more about than me.
This is right up my alley.
Yeah, I would refer to Sarah, the expert on that, any day of the week. And so a little bit more about our community engagement. So obviously Coffee with Purpose project introduction presentation is what we're doing here today. As I mentioned earlier, we do have a survey that is launching today. This is a survey that is going to be used to help inform locations that are selected for the additional concept designs. So we're trying to crowdsource flooding information, essentially. So this survey is going out to the public. Folks who are in those sort of state environmental circles may have seen a similar survey coming out from MAPC last year following some of the large flooding events. But this is essentially, it's a very simple survey. I'll do a little walkthrough of it at the very end of the presentation if we have time. But it's just asking folks, you know, where did you see the flooding? Do you know what kind of flooding it was? Did it come from a river or a stream, or did it come up through the basement? How long did the flooding last? How deep was the flooding? Things like that. There's an opportunity to upload photos if you have them. The one big reminder that I have to keep giving out is that please submit one location per response. The way that this survey is that it's tied to a GIS system. So every location that's identified will be pinpointed on a map. So it is one location per response, but there's no limit on the number of responses that you can provide. So if, you know, your friend or neighbor doesn't want to fill out the survey, but knows about this flooding that happened, you can absolutely submit a response for them. As I mentioned, there'll be those two public meetings. One will be virtual, one is going to be in person. The school engagement is going to be specifically done to hopefully bolster again those outdoor classroom, outdoor education opportunities at the high school. And then finally, the walk with CRWA in May. And now just a little bit about why this project is important. Why did the town choose to move forward with this project? Why did we apply for funding for this project and not 100 of other projects that are absolutely equally valuable and worth our time. And there's three main reasons. So the first is because of public feedback that we've heard. The project that I mentioned earlier, the MVP Climate Equity Project, was a regional project with Natick, Framingham, and Ashland that developed community liaison relationships with members who live within the environmental justice communities, generally non-English speakers of the first language. We heard from these peoples and from the surveys that came out of this project that there aren't enough public swimming opportunities in Natick. Not only are the private swimming opportunities expensive, the public swimming opportunities are either limited because of parking, limited due to water quality issues. As folks I'm sure are very aware, over the last 5 years, Lake Scituate and Duck Pond have been closed a number of times throughout the warmer months because of toxic algal blooms. And so this project provides an opportunity for us to design a treatment feature for Duck Pond to hopefully improve the water quality. The treatment feature is going to focus on treatment designs that improve water quality through natural vegetation, that slow water down to allow for sediment to drop out of the water, and that also reduces, and this is a very scientific term, the flashiness of the system. So right now, if folks have ever walked back into this facility's yard, there is a 4-foot by 4-foot box culvert that just dumps the water out into a tiny little stretch of stream before it reaches the settling pond. And that system is what is turned in the field very flashy. When we get large rainstorms, the water comes out of that pipe really fast. And so are there things that we can design that will help slow that water down and slow that flashiness to make sure that the water is actually sitting in the settling pond like it's supposed to, rather than just rushing straight into Duck Pond through the system?
There are a couple of questions up there, Brian and Catherine. Brian?
Yeah, to back it up a little bit, what's the grant money amount that started this?
Of course, so the town has been awarded about $266,000 for this project. The reason that the town chose to pursue this project this time is that the MVP program reduced its in-kind match requirement from 25% to 10%. So the town is able to cover the match requirement for this project purely through staff time. So there's no dollars coming from the town for this project beyond the staff time that's being put into it.
And so my next question is, the differentiation between the town, the DCR, and the DOT. They're kind of given a pass because they are these entities that are self-maintaining in some way. But yet, I think if you break it down, the town can have better policies than the state. And if you want to improve your water quality, you're able to do that without being penalized, and you could press the DCR to improve their methods. And so that probably isn't happening too much because of these institutional barriers that get erected. But if you look at it from the lens of the DOT and the Route 27 project, how many years have they been working on it? And how much kind of damage that they've done in these projects? I think they had a new mandate that they were supposed to do better with their environmental responsibilities, where stream crossings and runoff were much better focused and stuff addressed. But if you start on the 27 project at Snake Brook, where it did start, the settling pond that was supposed to go in there has been sitting there for 3 years as a mess. Do you have any idea what that is going to evolve into? I've queried the people that I can, and everybody kind of just shrugs their shoulders about it. And so
Brian, I talked to Nancy Putnam, who's the senior ecologist at DCR, regarding that a number of times. Nancy's the one who issued the initial stop work to DOT on that project because the appropriate permits with DCR had not been received. The town does not have any jurisdiction over that matter above DCR's jurisdiction on that matter as the landowner. So I have followed up with her a number of times. I have not received any updates recently. But DCR and DOT need to work out the land access and the land permissions before the town's wetlands jurisdiction comes into play.
So it falls back to the DOT just being a,
But it actually falls back on DCR at this point to follow up on their required actions that were placed on DOT as part of that initial stop work.
well, gosh, how can we influence the DCR to be a little more prompt with their efforts here on something that's quite impactful?
Ryan, if that was a question I could answer for you, we would be doing about 300 more things right now than I'm doing. Unfortunately, as it is with many state organizations, DCR is very understaffed, and I do have a very hard time getting direct or even anywhere near prompt responses, as folks may or may not have been aware, depending on what meetings you've been listening in on. The lease at Pegan Cove expired this November. I've been emailing DCR since April of this year regarding the lease renewal. I got an email back on Monday last week saying, yeah, let's get that renewal process started. So Brian, unfortunately, the town is also fighting against these issues as well. It's
frustrating all around. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I'll just leave it at that. Well, another thing that I think is hugely impactful and doesn't really get addressed is the amount of dead trees that have fallen into these ponds and brooks that are feeding these places. They've got some positive impact, but then the negative impact, I think, happens when you have these big rain events. These wood logs and trees float up and make it to the narrow points, which are culverts and drain systems. And so without having adequate maintenance to clean those choke points, it really impacts the flooding. I think you can notice that on Washington Street there at the Navy Yard Park or down at the railroad crossing. Both of those areas flood every time we get a big rain, and they're pretty impactful on that community there. But the town doesn't seem to have had any effort to clean out the brooks that are or flow points that are coming in there. The grates get clogged. It's kind of like the gutters on the streets, which my understanding is the town does every 3-year cycle for cleaning the storm drains. And in the meantime, other than that, they might respond to a clogged drain if it's affecting a neighborhood, but they're pretty much ignored.
So DPW responds to every report that's received regarding clogged drains, and we do respond as quickly as we can. Unfortunately, Brian, a number of the culverts and streams that you mentioned are either streams that are fully contained within private property where the town does not have any easements to access and maintain those systems, or they're culverts that are, again, not owned by the town. The culvert under the bridge at Washington Ave is a state-owned culvert because the bridge is a state-owned piece of infrastructure. So unfortunately, again, it's a bit of a battle and a bit of a butting heads against these communities. I will note that, the Pegan Brook flooding is one that has been on my radar since I started. We actually applied for an MVP grant in 2022 that we did not get awarded funding for to review that area. We still have that very high on our list and have actually included it in the update of the hazard mitigation plan that's currently being reviewed by FEMA, so that we can open up additional sources of funding to hopefully address that issue outside of the MVP program.
Yeah, sounds like a
Choke
pretty
points of
complex
ownership.
landscape. Thanks for
Thank
that
you.
additional background
Of
info.
course.
Claire, Catherine, you've been patient with your hand up, and then Brinley, and then we can let Claire continue.
This is a fabulous presentation, and I am very grateful that Natick is being proactive in this area. So I have a question that's going to seem like maybe crazy, but in my mind, it's here. And I'm wondering, one of my worst fears really for Florida is sinkholes. So I'm wondering, without the proper drainage, if we were to have 100-year rainfall. Are there any places in this town that might be vulnerable to something like that? And Claire, you probably know the land better than anyone, so I'm wondering if you have any sense of areas in town. Well, you're working on all the drainage, but just so I can rest assured that when I go to sleep at night, I'm going to wake up above ground.
I will say the one benefit that maybe one of many that we have going for us over Florida is that the soil and bedrock types that we find here in Massachusetts are very different than what we would find in Florida. I'm not saying that we are never going to be at risk for seeing a sinkhole here in Natick, but I think that the likelihood of us seeing sinkholes would be related to things like drainage system failures, where there's large amounts of water pouring out under a roadway, causing subsidence in that roadway. The majority of Natick, I would be very shocked and surprised if we were to see a sinkhole come up. I won't say never, but I will say even in a 100-year storm event, I think you're more likely to see it from an infrastructure perspective rather than a natural sinkhole development.
Yeah, I would absolutely, as a geologist, absolutely back that up 100%. Sinkholes, the ones in Florida happen because the rock it's limestone, it wears away naturally, just like the formation of a cave, and sometimes it falls in. The other environment where you can get sinkholes is in former mining areas, sometimes old coal mines. But again, we don't have that here. So I think of all the things terrifying in the world, for us here in Natick, that's probably pretty low on the list, but.
Well, I know my yard is all rocks because it was dug up for septic, so I'm pretty safe here, but I
Yeah.
just was thinking, that's a lot I don't know. And thank you, Sarah, for the second opinion.
Yay for New England rocks. Brindley, you got your hand up.
Thanks. So this brings up some interesting feelings for me always when this conversation comes up. Back when I was on the recycling committee, Terry Miller and I, we would talk about stormwater with people in the town. And at that stage, my kids were much younger and we went to Doug Pond every day. And so it was a regular back and forth of, do you realize that your yard potentially actually flows into Doug Pond? And so maybe you want to think about what you put on the lawn. And I know we talk about that a lot more now than we did then. And I've always felt like it's a little bit of a catch-22, depending on who I'm talking to, about whether or not I want to tell people that their lawn might drain into Doug Pond, because I also know that I don't want to scare people away from coming to Doug Pond. I feel like over the past 7-8 years, we've really seen attendance at the pond change. And so I'm wondering about a partnership, what you're looking into for a partnership with the Parks and Rec in terms of communication to help get the people who come to Doug Pond, who like the swimming lessons and all of that, to participate in this survey and really be a part of this and getting the information out, because Doug Pond is such a treasure. Full disclosure, I live around the corner from it. And we love to kayak there and swim there and hang out there. And we are always affected when it closes. And I know there are a lot of people who like to swim their dogs there in the boat ramp. And so I'm curious what you guys are, first of all, is there any thought about that? Does the communication around the stormwater runoff, is Parks and Rec worried about that? And how do we partner with them to help get more people involved?
Yeah, of course. So we are currently working with the school department as well as the Rec and Parks department on our community engagement on this project. So the survey link is actually going to be going out in Josepha Becker, who's the high school principal's newsletter that goes out on Friday. And it'll be posted on the town website as well to be shared to larger communities. We are also definitely be relying on folks who are learning about this to share it with your community. I think the one thing that we are trying, and the survey is obviously focused on sort of just generalized flooding. A lot of the communication at these public meetings is going to be focused on the fact that Doug Pond is clean. The reality is the water quality there, it gets tested every year. There are alum treatments done to help reduce the phosphorus levels. What we're trying to do here is to reduce the need for that maintenance. So can we make Doug Pond cleaner through passive systems rather than active systems? Can we reduce these occurrences of these algal blooms? And part of that community engagement is going to be talking a little bit about, as does the mural in town center, what goes on our streets and our sidewalks and our lawns does play a role. It's not necessarily that one person not fertilizing their lawn is going to be, the trigger that solves all the problems. But if folks focus on, slow release fertilizers, or making sure that they're applying fertilizers well in advance and well after rainstorms to limit that runoff. The fear tactics can come up a lot with this type of imagery, and I really want to make sure that we're just focusing this on sustainable solutions. So how can we get folks to understand that, yes, you're a part of this larger system, but it's not necessarily a black and white issue. And that's why I think that scale of the gray infrastructure to the green infrastructure is really key, because those watershed concepts that we're going to be reviewing are likely going to end up being a combination of gray and green infrastructure, because our streets we are limited in street width. We are limited in the depth to groundwater in some locations where we can do infiltration. Natick is a well-fed community. We have wellheads that limit where certain types of infiltration can occur. And so it's not going to be a black and white situation. And so I guess this project we're hoping is going to serve as more of an opportunity to provide some of that education to the public. Does that answer your question, Brinley?
Absolutely, and it's why I asked it, because I really wanted to be able to have you have a chance to say that out loud.
Thank you.
Great, thanks.
It's Bill.
This is a little bit off topic, but you're saying the 100-year rainfall is like 8, and they're thinking it might be 10 in 2070.
So currently it sits at about 8.5 inches in a 24-hour period. NOAA projects that we in 2070 could be seeing up to 12.2 inches of rain in the 100-year storm event.
What I was going to say is we've experienced at least 2 20-inch dumps in the south, Texas and Ashland. I
Yes.
think we're close to that. If we had 20 inches in Natick, what would happen to the South Natick Dam, for one thing? And I know that's off topic, but if you could just speculate a little bit on that.
So there's a combination of factors when we get a downpour. The volume of rain is obviously a huge piece of that. It's also the time at which that rain falls over. The final impact of large scale rainfalls is that, 20 inches of rain is over the 100-year storm, very obviously, probably at the 500-year storm, which is what the South Natick Dam is currently rated for. So the South Natick Dam is built to withstand the 500-year storm. However, just because it's only rated to the elevation of the 500-year storm does not mean if we get that storm event, it would fail. It means that if there are other factors contributing to that failure, and we get these 500-year storm events, the likelihood increases. So again, those root balls in the dam, things like that, which is why we're working to remove the spillway currently, and why we do monitoring every 6 months at the dam location to make sure that if any of those trees are falling over, we're seeing exposed root balls, those things can be addressed before we get any of those large scale storm events. And I do want to point out that no solution that we install, even if we were to go and renovate the entire drainage system in town, there are always going to be storms that come that the system is not going to be sized to handle. There are always going to be limitations in, catch basin sizing, how fast it takes for the water to get from the street into the catch basin. If the water levels are raised up over outlet structures, it may slow how fast water is able to drain into those wetlands and water bodies. So we are always looking and trying to design with climate change in mind, so that way our systems are not going to be dated like the systems we have today are, but we're never going to be able to address every single storm event.
Thank you.
Of course, yes.
I have 2 questions. And the first one is, how does water presently go from the settling pond to Dove Pond?
Sorry for the whiplash online again, folks. So there's currently 2 large pipes that go under Campus Drive.
Okay.
That get water from the settling pond to Dove Pond.
So in essence, it just.
Yeah, so they're set at a slight angle so that the outlet on the Dove Pond side is slightly higher than the settling pond side to minimize water flushing back into the settling pond. Though during these large flood events, that will likely occur. And also to allow the water in the settling pond to hopefully reach a certain elevation before it's getting into Dug Pond. But because it is so sedimented in at this point, there's less of that stopping.
Okay. And my second question is with regard to the survey, when you say flooding, what, like.
I was saying, if I can
was
just
thinking
you to
about my
hold
trailer
that
in the woods, like,
question.
is that a flooding or is it just?
So
your
generally
house
we're-
Or what?
Generally, we're looking for flooding that is impacting the public.
Okay.
So obviously the trails do impact the public, but not in the same way that
Gotcha.
roadway and sidewalk. And I will do a walkthrough of
Sure.
the survey as
Yeah.
well, so we can get into a little bit of detail about that.
Thank you.
Of course. And this maybe gets into Brian's question a little bit as well about, sort of larger water quality issues. Another reason that we're taking this project on is because the town is required to remove a certain amount of phosphorus from the water, specifically within the Charles River watershed. The Charles River is under what is known as a TMDL, which is a total maximum daily load. And that is a poundage number of phosphorus that is entering the river each year. And the state has worked to determine what this limit is that we need to maintain or get below in order to ensure that our water quality is where we want it to be. That permit was just updated and the town has received our updated requirements for phosphorus removal. And they're extreme. I'm talking 700 plus pounds of phosphorus that the town needs to be removing from the runoff that's entering the Charles River. And that's not the exact number, that is a rough number somewhere between what our old number was and what our new number is. And when we think about phosphorus, the amount of phosphorus that these types of treatment features are removing is substantial, but they really have to work in concert with other systems to see true demonstrated impact. And the town does a lot of other things to remove phosphorus. We do street sweeping, we do catch basin cleaning, we maintain our drainage system in a certain manner. But the updated numbers are coming because climate change projections have updated and we need to be able, like we said, we need to be trying to stay ahead of these things. And so the town is gonna be under a great effort to remove this phosphorus from this watershed over the coming years. And this project, not only will we get phosphorus removal from the feature that's being designed here, the internal training of staff increases our capacity for additional installations throughout town. Yeah, Brindley.
So I just thought of this when you were talking about this. I know show and tell is always this fantastic thing, and I'm wondering if you do some things like when you plan your walk at on Earth Day around Natick or whatever, if you communicate with DPW to see if they can also have their large, incredible drain cleaner. I call it a drain cleaner.
Truck.
Yeah,
Truck.
yeah,
That's a great truck.
exactly. Yep. Because those are fascinating, and I really think they do an incredible job of driving home the message about cleaning out the drains and what gets in the drains, and communicating about the same thing that happens in your kitchen sink drain, and all of that about what's going on. And I always feel like that kind of a show and tell really helps. So I didn't know if maybe there was a way to, when you do things, to have some visual show and tell type as well.
Yeah, of course, because the walk's happening on a weekend, we are reliant on folks being willing to take on the overtime. So we are in coordination with DPW, and we are considering a number of different opportunities for them to be engaged with the walk as well.
Good. I don't know how much more of your presentation you have. I
Rick,
want
if
to
you
let you
I've
get
got
forward,
more
but
slides, and then we'll be at the end, and then I can get to more questions.
okay.
And I think this slide gets into a lot of what we've been talking about today, which is the final reason that we could consider this project is incredibly important is the known future condition. We know climate change is here, and we know that these impacts are only going to increase. And so this is the number that I was just talking about. In 1964, the 100-year storm over 2 days, and I apologize, I said, was 8.5 inches. And so today, our 100-year storm is about 7.9 inches, between 7.9 to 8.5 in a 1-day period. And in 2024, the 100-year storm today over 2 days, so just trying to have that same unit of time as
Yeah.
the 1964 measurement. The 100-year storm today is 12.2 inches. And so the 100-year storm for 2070 is projected to be up to 12.5 inches over a 1-day period. So we're trying to take the system that we have currently and adapt it to be able to handle these kinds of changing conditions. I think nobody in town will try to hide the fact that our drainage system is undersized for the storms that we are seeing today. I think anybody who lives in these neighborhoods behind town hall, when we get a 2-inch rainstorm and there's an inch or two of water sitting in the street for a couple of hours as it slowly drains through the system, those are the types of things that we're really looking to improve upon in these types of projects. And so next steps, there's a project webpage, which I will add the link into here before I get it sent out to you guys, that you guys can keep an eye out on for updates. Our survey, the survey is available in 4 languages. There's a little button at the top that allows you to change the language. And you can also send an email to me to be added to the project email list. So these will be people who will get direct emails when we have updates about the project, specifically about timing of events and things like that. And so Rick, feel free.
Yes. Okay. Going back, well, first a quick idea for you in terms of manpower supervision on the walk. Jeff Alderson, well, actually Craig Lazat, who is their facilities and grounds and plant guy at the MathWorks Route 9 Apple Lane or Apple Drive facility, offered people to come and help at Earth Day, which is great. We haven't had any discussion about where they might be needed, but this could be one place where they might be needed. So I just thought I'd throw that out there. Jeff, right?
Yes, I do. Okay.
Second question, a little bit off, but going back to your original sort of, floodplain, so this drives at sort of where we live, South Natick Hills, and all the developments that have grown up in the last 6 years, 7 years since we've been here around us and are still growing. This I think does not drain into Doug Pond. I think it goes over, I don't know, via India Brook maybe. And I'm just wondering what sort of phosphorus our developments might be contributing to the Charles River, going back to that 700-pound, overage that's there. Is there any measure of that, or has there been any contact with Riverside's, services, who does our landscaping here and probably does some other ones? They do MathWorks too, by the way, and use some electric mowers.
So Rick, we probably don't have an exact number of phosphorus that the property is contributing. The South Natick Hills development was constructed at a time where there was a requirement to put in stormwater management infrastructure. So you guys might see in the neighborhood, there's sort of detention ponds throughout the neighborhood.
Tons of them, yeah. Yeah, it's really
and
amazing.
So those ponds, as long as they're maintained as designed, have a certain number of phosphorus removal that they get credit for according to the state standards. The reality is that there's not a hard and fast number for phosphorus when it comes to exactly what each specific system is going to remove or what each site is generating to that system. The state assigns standards to these types of systems based on the area and the environment that they're being installed in. So an area like South Natick Hills is a residential subdivision with multifamily housing. So there's maybe going to be a higher roof density than driveway density as compared to a more traditional single family home subdivision. So roof runoff is considered what's known as quote unquote clean runoff, because it generally is not picking up anything that might be sitting on the ground before it enters these systems, because usually the pipes connect directly from the roof to the system. So roof runoff has a phosphorus value of 0 versus road and driveways have a certain amount of phosphorus that is sort of associated with those types of impervious surfaces. Lawn has its own numbers. And depending on what type of environment you're in, you design the system with either certain pre-treatment features or with certain plantings to maximize the phosphorus removal that you're getting from the system. So, a grassed bioretention swale like we have in front of the high school doesn't have as high of a phosphorus removal count as a rain garden that's going to be vegetated with things like Joe Pye weed and other types of native plants that are really maximizing the amount of nutrients that they're pulling out of that soil.
Is that the kind of passive thing that you're thinking of for the, around the settlement pond, or, that would reduce the problems there?
Exactly, similar types of features that focus on plantings and also increasing the amount of time that the water is moving through that little stream corridor before it actually hits the pond, ways to increase the sinuosity and natural.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. There's a great one of those at the Medfield State Hospital. There's that might have been a federal project. I don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot more of them popping up around now because of a number of communities are under these TMDLs. They're watershed specific, so you can look up online the specific ones that might affect your watershed. And I will say that they are pretty out of date.
Okay, thank you. Sorry to be off topic.
That's fine. Claire, I had a couple of questions, and I know Cindy does as well. But two questions on my part. One, in a previous slide, you mentioned you could email you directly to get on the email list for staying abreast of the project. Are communications about this project tied in with the town's what I would characterize as greatly improved communications infrastructure these days, where you can go on to kind of that central app and get informed about all of this stuff? And then my other question is, if what you're presenting today is the planning and design study, is presumably the hope that we'll be able to move forward to build and implementation of this. Any rough idea, assuming we were to get that we had the funding that we needed, either internally or from further grants, what would the rough timeline be for actually building something out? Or is it too early to say that because you don't know what the design is yet?
We do actually have a rough timeline, and I'm just trying to pull up a document so I can actually give you guys the most.
Great. And I had stopped your screen sharing, but feel free to share again if you've got more.
Oh, that's fine. This is not something that I had in the slide. But to answer your first question is, yes, there will be an announcement about this on the home page of the webpage. We're going to be pushing out on social media, as well as there will be a number of notices sent out to the folks who are signed up for sort of relevant board and committee lists. So like if you're signed up for the Concom agenda alerts, you might get a news flash about this webpage. But we are trying to also streamline communication about the project. So that's why if you are interested, please do send me a note about signing up for the email list, because we're trying to get folks information in the way that they are looking to receive it. And it seems like direct project updates have been the preferred method of communication. But we've heard feedback from on some other projects that, they don't want to have to go to the website and search through what they're looking for. They want to know what's going on. So we are working on that as a method of communication. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, we did submit an application in partnership with the Charles River Watershed Association to the EPA for funding on this project for the construction phase of it. And I'm just pulling up here we go, the edits to the narrative. So we estimated, given that design is going to be done at June 30th of next year, we have that as a firm date in our timeline. The permit, getting those designs that we finish on through the permitting process, we estimate will take through about the fall of 2025. If we get this funding from EPA, the bidding for the construction phase happening end of 2025, early 2026, with construction potentially happening then in calendar year 2026. That is if we get this EPA grant. Again, we put in a funding request of, I think the total funding request is just about $3 million. And that is for construction equipment. That includes adding a new Vector truck, Brinley, to our town's fleet to contribute to the maintenance of these systems, as well as any soils, plant materials, educational signage for the site. And then if dredging, that also would cover the dredging costs. The amount of funding that we're awarded may vary depending on whether or not we determine dredging is feasible. And so we do expect to hear about this funding sometime in this fiscal year. Sorry, I almost said calendar year, and that would put me on a very tight timeline. Sometime in this fiscal year. And so we will know if we don't get this funding that we need to apply for additional grant funding for the implementation of this. We see this project as a very appealing project to grant programs, so we would go to grant funding prior to looking for capital funding from the town.
If we're gonna get another vac truck, I know some communities have had fun letting the residents name the trucks, like with snow plows and stuff. It might be something to consider. There'd probably have to be a lot of guidelines on what's not considered appropriate. But anyway, Cindy, yeah.
And yeah, you remember who was first. Oh, okay. So I am very curious about this whole, I guess it's a vacuum truck, but the whole, how do you get phosphorus out of the water?
That's my question is.
Yeah,
How do you?
and then what do you do with it? Like, can you sell it?
It'd be a much more profitable business. I think more towns would be eager to get the phosphorus removed if they could turn it around. So,
and sort of where is this? Where are the points at which, like, you have this TMDL for
Yes.
the river?
Yes.
And so where are you measuring and where's the phosphorus? All of that whole, that's what I'm.
Yes, so getting a little off topic, but I think this is a great point and definitely goes into what this project is getting at. So the primary source of phosphorus that we find in our runoff is organic material. It's things like fallen leaves, it's things like organic fertilizers that have phosphorus as a component, and then just your standard vegetative material that's going to end up in our water bodies. So the primary method of removal is removing that organic material. So the catch basin cleaning, they suck up all the debris that's sitting at the bottom of the catch basins. And by removing that material, we're removing phosphorus that is potentially ending up in our water system. On the systems that are, taking stormwater runoff and filtering it, we're generally looking at plants and their natural systems of taking up nutrients as our method of removing. So generally in things like bioswales, rain gardens, you're looking at a combination of methods. The vegetation is removing some of the phosphorus as it takes up some of that water and uses the phosphorus to grow. And the sediment and the soil that the water is going through is also removing some of that nutrient capacity. And Sarah might want to chime in on this one if I get off topic here too much. This is not my area of expertise. But the charges that these nutrients have are attracted to the charges in the soil, and certain soil materials will pull those nutrients and those chemicals and those minerals out of the runoff as it moves through the soil.
Okay.
Is that right, Sarah?
Yeah, so yeah, and there are so many different treatment methods available, and a lot of them are dependent. We spoke earlier about the geology and whether you get sinkholes or not. And this is a little off topic, but I know in my work history, the underlying geology is hugely important. We are not in a limestone environment, which is carbonates. Chemistry works very differently in those environments than it does up here. So, I definitely found for sites that I had, sometimes all the literature was written in carbonate environments and it had nothing to do with what we were dealing with up here. So but it is something that the folks that design the system will take into account. You'll actually as you do this process, you scale up to, do some initial work in the lab of like, hey, is this going to work? And if it doesn't, you haven't spent a ton of money, you could try something else, and then you scale it up a little bit more, just so that you have some pretty good assurance that what you design, because you think it's cool and it's going to work, is actually going to work. And that's really important so that we don't waste a lot of time and money.
Absolutely, and that's part of the reason we did test pits at the settling pond at the facilities yard for the high school. Is so that we can get an idea of what the existing soil matrix is, how far down do we have to the groundwater depth, so we know how to design these features to maximize those nutrient removals, the slowing of the water, the total suspended solids settling, things like that.
So I guess one last question is, what happens to all the stuff that you're removing that's got this phosphorus? Where do you put that?
Yes, so catch basin cleaning is obviously a much smaller scale. Generally the material that's removed from catch basins will end up in a commercial composting facility.
Okay.
It's just organic material and maybe a little bit of sediment. Trash is usually removed.
Uh-huh.
It depends specifically what community you're in. For something like the settling pond,
Yeah.
if we were dredging that existing material, like I said, that would need to be disposed of or reused as soil material. Generally, the bioretention systems, they are to a certain degree self-maintaining.
Mhm.
If there are erosion issues, if there's, high accumulation of trash and debris, those types of things need to be maintained. But that's part of the reason that we like those types of systems, is that they are generally what are known as low-level maintenance systems. They generally don't require specific technology to clean and maintain them. The catch basins and some of the, the underground chamber systems require specialized equipment in order to clean them properly. A good bioretention area can be maintained with, somebody going in to do a little bit of weeding, trash removal, and, periodic inspections to make sure that there isn't sediment piling in any specific locations. And so we do need internal training on how to do these types of maintenance, so the town doesn't have to contract out to a third party when we need to do these types of maintenance. But that is part of the reason that we like these systems, is that they can, in some situations, require less maintenance.
Cool, thank you.
Terrific. Well, that was quite the presentation, Claire. A lot of great information. It's very assuring to know that there are very competent minds working on all of this, and not just kind of.
Well, I'll take credit as being half the competent mind and give Weston and Sampson the other half.
Good. Well, and also leveraging all of these grants, obviously, to pay for as little as possible out of our own pockets.
Claire, can I ask a slightly off-topic question? A couple of years ago, there was another one of these programs that looked at stuff primarily, it seemed like around Lake Cochituate, and I kind of lost track of that project. Did we end up getting some designs out of that?
So Sarah, if I'm remembering correctly, you're thinking of the larger Lake Cochituate watershed project. I think it was a regional project with Framingham as well. I have the report sitting in my office, and I read through it right when I first started. I think that what we primarily got out of that project was concepts, no actual designs.
Okay.
And because of the regional nature, for folks who aren't aware, some of our communities have had a lot of staff turnover, as well as Natick has, in the conservation offices. There's been a little bit of difficulty engaging on a regional scale because the staff turnover has been so high. But Framingham has a new agent who's been there for about 1.5 years. Ashland has 2 agents now, or an agent, an assistant agent. And Wayland also has their agent back now as well. So we do, Matt Gardner and I have talked about trying to bring that project back to the forefront. Because obviously Lake Cochituate is the other public swimming location where we can improve water quality here in town.
Cool, thank you.
Great.
I have one more question, if I could ask.
Yeah, no,
there's with an administration coming in which either wants to gut or kill the EPA, is there another source of funding that you guys could go to as a sort of plan B? Is that?
So thankfully, this is state EPA, not federal EPA.
Okay.
We got a little bit of a holdout there, hopefully. Unfortunately, we're all sort of just waiting with bated breath to see how the administration changes. As folks may or may not be aware, during the last administration under the future president was there was a pretty substantial change to the definition of WOTUS, or Waters of the United States, that essentially removed protection from a large swath of types of water bodies and wetlands throughout the country.
Right.
So we are really just waiting to see what comes, to see how we need to adapt to federal regulations. Massachusetts is a very lucky state in that our state government and our state regulations are very strong and won't necessarily be hugely impacted by federal changes, but there may be some strong changes coming in the next couple of years.
Does Mass EPA get federal funding from the EPA?
Very likely, yes. But I believe, and I am not an expert in how federal funding cycles work. I believe that the funding we are applying for is funding that they already have and are distributing as part of the one of the various infrastructure bills.
But then there's impoundment. We've seen that before. Anyway,
So
I won't get ahead of ourselves.
Cheerier, Rick.
I was hoping we could finish on a high note, Rick.
Yeah, well, I'm high because I see some real synergy going on here with Earth Day and this project, as well as possibly. Anyway, we'll see.
Yeah, I completely agree.
I would love to finish on a high note of saying how incredibly fortunate we are as a town to have Claire on our roster of staff, because you really do an amazing job, Claire. You, Amanda, the whole team, Jillian, you guys are really we are so very fortunate to have you guys. If we could clone you, the world would be a better place, because you really are just fantastic.
Agree. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, I think we all echo that. So
definitely.
Yeah. Again, well, thanks again, Claire. And this does conclude not only today's session, but Coffee with a Purpose for this year. So take some time off, folks. Enjoy all of your end of year traditions and holidays. I'll probably send out one email next week just to remind people that there's not a session, to maybe give a little bit more hint on what's to come next year. But this week in particular, as I understand it, select board's looking to maybe actually make their decision at next week's meeting on the immigrant next week.
This week.
I believe
This week. I'm sorry. Yes, day after
it's
tomorrow.
this Wednesday.
Day after tomorrow. So,
and if we're talking about this week, I'd also really love to bring up that two things that are combined. One is that the memorial project for the MSBA that we have been working on for 3 years did get accepted to the feasibility stage. So we did get into yes, you're allowed to make a feasibility study to see if Memorial can qualify for MSBA funding. That just happened. And my guess is, to the second part of my comment, is that will come up tonight. Tonight, there is a joint meeting between the select board and the school committee as part of the school committee meeting, where they will be talking about the budget and the override and the thoughts of what's upcoming in the year, what may or may not be on the ballot in the spring, et cetera. And I do think that it's probably one of the most important things we as a town can pay attention to. We're going to be asking, I believe, for a lot of money, potentially $8 million. So I think that the best way for people to get the question answered and to participate if they have questions is to be involved in the meeting tonight. So if people are interested, that's tonight for the school committee.
Brinley, what's MSBA?
The Massachusetts School Building Association. And
Good.
they are the state arm that helps municipalities fund school buildings. So we have previously received 3 of these grants before. It helped us build the high school, it helped us build Kennedy, and it helped us build Wilson. The amounts that we've received in the past have changed. They've varied, because there's always a part of a need based in there for what your need is, versus how much they'll give you. But it's very critical. It's very critical because it's really hard to build a school building without state help. And this is part of that.
They also have a sort of a point system where depending on what you're proposing, they will give you more or less money. So it's really important to try to align your design with their requirements if you want to maximize the amount that they can give you.
Correct. And there is or at least I'm assuming it's still there. I haven't looked at it immediately, but they do have a lot that involves around green building. And so I am sure that the school committee and Jillian will be looking to make the building as green as possible.
Good. Thank you for those public service announcements, Brinley. Good. I think we're good to go. Enjoy.
Thank you. Thank you,
rest of the
Don
week.
and Martin, for squeezing this extra, maybe it's not an extra session, but getting this done. Really appreciate all the work and great speakers and conversations you guys have managed.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm looking forward to next year too. I think we're gonna have a lot of good speakers starting off the year. And looks like we're gonna have some contested seats in the spring election. So
Yeah.
looking forward to candidate forums there.